On February 11th, 1982, the gym in a small Ohio river town smelled like hot rubber, floor varnish, and the cheap popcorn they sold in paper boats that always leaked butter onto your fingers. The bleachers were packed the way they always were on a winter Thursday. Teachers in wool coats, dads still in work boots. Teenagers squeezed shoulder to shoulder because there was nowhere else to be. It was local basketball, the kind that never made the news, the kind you forgot by Monday. Benjamin Carter didn't forget anything. He wasn't a scout. He wasn't law enforcement. He was a quiet man in his late 20s with a state job haircut and the particular calm of someone who spent his days reconciling numbers that never wanted to match. Accounting did that to you? It trained you to notice patterns even when you didn't want to. It taught you that random was usually just unseen. He came to games because his younger brother played trombone in the pep band, and because the noise made his apartment feel less empty. He sat 2 rows up from the aisle, close enough to hear the squeak of sneakers and the wet slap of palms on the ball. Close enough to feel the crowd lean when a shot arced high and hung there like it was deciding which way the night would go. The game started normal. A couple of rushed layups, a missed free throw, a coach yelling a name that wasn't anyone's name, but sounded like one. The home team, East Bridge, played hard but sloppy, like kids who'd grown up shoveling driveways instead of running drills year-round. Benjamin watched without meaning to analyze, letting the sounds wash over him. Then the first foul happened. Not a desperate reach, not a late shove under the rim. A clean, almost gentle hand check at mid-court, the kind refs sometimes ignore because it doesn't change the play. The whistle was sharp, and for a second the whole gym went still, like a classroom caught mid-mischief. Benjamin glanced at the scoreboard out of habit and then down at the little notepad he kept folded in his coat pocket, an old reflex from his job. He marked it without thinking. Q1, foul 1. 2 minutes later, the second foul came in the same place, on the same type of contact, same defender, same casual timing. Not frustration, not panic, more like punctuation. The ref's arm went up. The crowd groaned automatically. Benjamin's pencil hesitated. It was still too early to call it anything. Teams picked up early fouls all the time, but the rhythm felt wrong. Eastbridge wasn't being outplayed into mistakes. They were choosing mistakes in the open, like they were paying a small price to buy something bigger. By the time the third foul landed, again at midcourt, again unnecessary, Benjamin realized he'd stopped watching the ball and started watching the decisions around it. The bench, the coach. The way the coach didn't react with anger, didn't jerk his hands up, didn't bark at the player to be smarter. He just tapped the folded clipboard against his thigh once, as if confirming a time. Benjamin forced himself to relax, to laugh with everyone else when the pep band blared a too loud riff, to clap when Eastbridge hit a corner 3. He told himself he was being ridiculous. He was a guy with a pencil at a high school game, not a man uncovering anything. And then he noticed something so small it didn't even deserve to be noticed, except that it hit him like an accounting error you can't unsee. Every time Eastbridge committed one of those early, pointless fouls, a man in the far corner of the visitors' bleachers shifted his posture in the same way. Lean forward, hand to mouth, eyes down, like he was counting under his breath. Benjamin didn't know the man. The man didn't cheer, didn't curse, didn't look like a father or a teacher. He wore a dark coat buttoned up to the throat and kept his hat on indoors, which was rude in a Midwestern gym where everyone knew everyone. Benjamin tried to look away, but the whistle came again, foul number 4, and the man's hand moved to his mouth with that same quiet, rehearsed precision. Benjamin's pencil pressed too hard and tore the paper. He stared at the rip like it was proof of something he couldn't name yet. And for the first time that night, the game stopped feeling like entertainment. It started feeling like a message being sent in a language nobody else in the gym even knew existed. By halftime, Benjamin had a page of scratches that didn't look like a fan's notes anymore. It looked like a ledger. Columns, little boxes, circles where the same thing kept happening. Eastbridge wasn't fouling in the paint where bodies tangled and mistakes were normal. They were fouling in the open floor. The same kind of contact, the same timing window, the same strange calm from the bench. He tried to talk himself out of it the way ordinary people do when reality starts to feel theatrical. Maybe the coach was old school. Maybe he wanted to set a tone. Maybe he was trying to rattle the other team's ball handler. Interrupt tempo. Slow the game into something uglier where Eastbridge could survive. Those were basketball reasons, normal reasons. But every time Benjamin offered himself one, the pattern answered back like it had been waiting. The third quarter began, and the coach, Coach Dyer, according to the program, made a substitution right after foul number 5. Not because the kid looked tired, not because he was in trouble. He pulled him as cleanly as a chess move, and the replacement came in without eye contact, straight to a spot on the floor like he'd been told the square ahead of time. Benjamin watched the far corner of the visitor bleachers instead of the free throws. The Hat Man didn't clap, didn't shift like a restless spectator. He moved only when the whistle blew on those specific fouls. Lean forward, hand to mouth, eyes down. A tiny nod that could have been nothing, except it wasn't nothing when it happened the same way. The same number of beats after the whistle, as if he was confirming receipt. Then, late in the third, Eastbridge committed a different kind of foul, an offensive charge under the rim. The kind that actually made sense because the defender took it like he'd been waiting. The gym erupted, happy for once, and Benjamin felt relief, finally. Randomness, but the Hat Man didn't move. No lean, no hand, no nod. Benjamin's throat went dry. It wasn't fouls in general. It was specific fouls, in specific places, in specific sequence, like the coach and one player were tapping out a sentence in a language made of whistles. Hand check at mid-court meant something. A charge didn't. A reach-in near the scorer's table didn't. An illegal screen at the top of the key did. When the game ended, Eastbridge lost by 6. People filed out complaining about refs, about missed shots, about how kids these days didn't box out. Benjamin lingered long enough to see the Hat Man stand. He didn't mingle. He didn't stop at the band. He didn't exchange the lazy smiles locals traded like currency. He went straight for the exit, coat still buttoned high. Benjamin followed at a distance that felt reasonable, close enough to keep him in sight, far enough to pretend it was coincidence. Outside, the cold hit like a slap. The parking lot was a spread of dirty snowbanks and idling engines. Parents called for their kids. Someone's radio played a Christmas song that didn't match the season anymore. The Hat Man crossed the lot without hurrying. He paused near a trash can, dropped his program in with the careless flick of a bored spectator, and kept walking. A minute later, a teenager in a team jacket, too young to be suspicious, too normal to be dangerous, wandered up, looking for something, and lifted the program out as if it had been his all along. Benjamin stood frozen beside his own car, keys in his fist, watching a perfectly ordinary motion become a perfectly unnatural transaction. Then he felt it, soft at first, like paranoia, someone's attention landing on the back of his neck. He turned. Coach Dyer was still at the gym doors, framed by light, watching the parking lot with a face that wasn't angry or confused. It was measuring, and Benjamin understood, with a sudden, quiet certainty, that the game hadn't been the only thing being played tonight. Benjamin didn't go back to his car right away. He pretended to fuss with the trunk, pretended to look for something he'd dropped, anything to buy a few seconds while the pieces tried to decide what shape they were supposed to form. Coach Dyer stayed at the doors long enough to make sure the parking lot emptied the way he wanted, then turned back inside. The teenager with the team jacket disappeared into the stream of people like he'd never existed. The Hat Man was already gone, and Benjamin, an ordinary guy with a regular job and a brain that had spent too many quiet hours finding order in noise, stood there, realizing that if he drove straight home, whatever this was might simply follow him there. So he did the most unheroic thing imaginable. He drove to a gas station. Bright lights, cameras, constant motion. A place where being watched didn't mean anything because everybody was always watching everybody. He pulled into a spot beneath the canopy and sat with his hands on the steering wheel until his knuckles stopped hurting. He told himself to let it go. But the pattern wouldn't let him, because the pattern hadn't started tonight. It had started 3 games ago. The first time, Eastbridge had played North Park and committed exactly 9 hand-check fouls. 9, all on the perimeter, spread like they'd been scheduled. The second time, against West Hollow, it happened again. 9, same type, same zones, same odd substitution after the 5th. Tonight made 3. Benjamin hadn't known he was collecting evidence. He'd thought he was just being irritated. Now, sitting in the gas station's fluorescent hum, he took a pen and wrote it all down on the back of a receipt. 9 perimeter hand checks, sub after 5, watcher reacts only to sequence program in trash retrieval. Then he stared at the receipt like it was going to tell him what to do next. Calling the local police felt absurd. "Hello, officer. I think my town's basketball coach is sending secret messages with fouls." He could already hear the silence on the other end. The polite dismissal. The laugh they'd try not to let him hear. Calling the FBI felt even worse. That was something people did in movies. People who wanted attention. People who were wrong. And yet, Cold War America was full of quiet warnings in the background. The news always had words like defector and embassy and counterintelligence tucked between weather reports. The country lived with a constant low-grade dread that never quite said its name. Benjamin didn't know the rules, but he understood one thing. If this was nothing, it would fade. If it was something, it would adapt. He decided to test whether he was the only person who could see it. The next morning, he went where small-town people went when they needed to ask a question without officially asking it. A diner. He slid into a booth at Helen's coffee shop with a newspaper and the kind of face that invited conversation. The waitress, Judy, recognized him. Everyone recognized everyone and poured coffee before he even ordered. "Good game last night," she said with the automatic optimism people used to soften disappointment. Benjamin forced a smile. Didn't feel like a normal game. Judy shrugged. "Refs were terrible. I mean, the fouls." He kept his voice casual, like he was complaining about strategy. Same thing every time. "You notice?" Judy leaned in, lowering her voice the way people did when gossip turned serious. "My cousin's kid plays for Eastbridge," she said. "They've been practicing weird how—" She hesitated, eyes flicking around the room like the walls might repeat her. "Coach has them doing whistle drills," she murmured. "Not plays. Whistle drills. Like he blows once. They do one thing. Twice, another. But it's not for defense. It's for timing." Benjamin's stomach tightened. "Who told you that? Cousin? She thinks it's some kind of discipline thing?" Judy's voice dropped further. "But she also said Coach Dyer doesn't let parents near practice anymore. Says it distracts the boys." Benjamin's coffee suddenly tasted like metal. He nodded like he'd heard nothing unusual, paid his bill, and walked out into the cold with the feeling that something had just snapped into place behind his eyes. If Dyer had taught the team to respond to whistles, and last night's fouls were triggered by whistles, then the fouls weren't mistakes. They were outputs, signals, and the terrifying part wasn't the possibility that a Soviet network had found a way to hide inside a high school gym. It was the possibility that it had been there long enough to become normal, long enough that nobody thought to question why a coach would teach boys to move like a metronome. That afternoon, Benjamin did what he told himself he'd never do. He found a number, an old federal tip line printed in tiny text on the last page of a newspaper, the kind of thing you normally skimmed past. He dialed. The line rang twice. A recorded voice asked him not to leave his name unless it was urgent. It sounded bored, like bureaucracy. Benjamin almost hung up. Then he remembered the hat man's stillness, the program in the trash, the kid retrieving it like it was oxygen. He left a message anyway. Not KGB, not CIA, not Spies, just facts. A local basketball team. 3 games. Same foul pattern. Same substitution timing. Unknown man in stands responds only to those fouls. Program drop in retrieval. Coach watching the lot after he finished. And for a moment the world stayed normal. Cars passed. People carried groceries. The sky didn't split open. Then, as he walked back to his own car, his phone rang, only once, and stopped. A signal, not a call. Benjamin stood in the parking lot with the cold biting his face and realized someone out there had heard him loud and clear. and they didn't need words to tell him that. The second time the phone rang, it didn't stop after one chime. It rang twice, slow, measured, then went dead again, as if whoever controlled the line was testing whether Benjamin would flinch on command. He didn't answer. He stood beside his car with the receiver buzzing in his pocket like a trapped insect and watched the parking lot instead, forcing his breathing to stay ordinary. People moved in and out of the grocery store across the street. A woman loaded paper bags into a station wagon. A kid dragged a skateboard by the trucks. Everything looked harmless because harmless was what the world specialized in pretending to be. Then he noticed the man in the payphone booth. No one used the booth anymore unless they had a reason. The man wasn't calling. Not really. His hand rested on the receiver like it was an anchor. His eyes angled toward the lot without appearing to look at anything in particular. He wore a tan coat that belonged to no era, no trend. Too plain to remember, too plain to describe later. Benjamin turned his key, climbed into his car, and didn't start it yet. He waited. The man in the booth replaced the receiver with slow care, like he didn't want the click to echo, and stepped out. He didn't walk toward Benjamin. He walked past him, close enough that Benjamin caught the faint smell of cold air and cigarette paper, then kept going, never breaking stride, never acknowledging him. But a folded slip of paper appeared under Benjamin's windshield wiper anyway. Benjamin stared at it for a full second, the way you stare at something you don't want to pick up because picking it up makes it real. He glanced at the store windows, the passing cars, the boy with the skateboard. No one reacted. No one cared. He eased the paper free with 2 fingers, like it might cut him. It wasn't a threat. Not directly. It was a schedule. 3 digits, a dash. 4 digits, like a local extension or a code, followed by 2 words printed in block capitals. Don't talk. And beneath that, smaller, almost casual, go home. Benjamin's throat tightened with a ridiculous, sudden urge to laugh. The message had the tone of advice, not intimidation, which made it worse. Advice meant someone believed they had the right to manage his behavior. Advice meant someone believed he was already inside their fence. He crumpled the paper in his fist, started the car, and drove. He didn't take his usual route. He looped through back streets, turned where he normally wouldn't, used red lights as excuses to watch his mirrors. A dark sedan appeared behind him once, then vanished after a turn. Another car, older, boxier, held 2 lengths back for 3 blocks, then drifted away like it had only been curious. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. That was the new rule. You couldn't tell the difference anymore. At home, he parked with the garage door open until the engine was off, then waited again, listening for tires on gravel. For a door latch? For the soft stutter of a car that didn't quite commit to leaving. Nothing. His house stood there like it had always stood there. Siding and windows, and the illusion of safety. Inside, his wife, Laura, was at the kitchen counter, sorting mail. She looked up and smiled, and the normalcy of it struck him so hard it almost broke him. He kissed her cheek a little too quickly, a little too hard, like he needed to prove to himself that warmth still existed. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah." He lied, and the lie tasted wrong. The mail on the counter included the usual: a utility bill, a catalog, a flyer for the next home game, Eastbridge versus Briarfield, Friday night, packed gym, holiday fundraiser. Benjamin stared at the flyer as if it had just started breathing. On the back, someone had stamped a small block of numbers in purple ink, probably a printing error, probably nothing at all, but the numbers were too neat, too centered, too deliberate, and Benjamin understood, with a cold clarity that didn't feel like his own. Whatever he'd touched wasn't confined to a gym anymore. It was in his hands. It had followed him home. The next morning, Benjamin couldn't stop seeing numbers. They floated behind his eyelids while he shaved. They sat in the steam on the bathroom mirror. They followed him through the day like a second set of footsteps that didn't match his own. He brought the game flyer to work folded inside his lunch bag, the way a guilty person hides nothing important and everything important at the same time. At noon, he took it out in his car and studied the purple stamp again. 8 digits, cleanly printed, too crisp to be a smear from a stack of wet ink. He tried to convince himself it was a vendor code or a misfeed from some print shop in town. But the placement was wrong for an error, and the style was wrong for anything meant to be read by the public. That night, he did what normal people do when their mind catches on something it can't release. He looked for an ordinary explanation hard enough that it almost became a prayer. He went to the convenience store, bought a newspaper, and flipped to the local sports section because sports are supposed to be safe. The Eastbridge headline was small. High school basketball didn't get much ink, but the box score listed personal fouls for the starters, and Benjamin's eyes locked onto the columns like they'd been waiting for him. 3 games, 3 different opponents, and the same 2 players at the top of the foul count every time. Not because they were reckless, but because their fouls were specific. A reach-in early, a moving screen late, a deliberate body check at a moment when it would be noticed but not punished harshly. Fouls that looked clumsy to the casual fan, but landed with the precision of a person tapping a metronome. He circled the numbers with the pen he kept in his glove box. Then he wrote the purple stamp beside them. They didn't match perfectly. Nothing in this world matched perfectly, but there was a rhythm between them that made his stomach tighten. It was the same feeling he'd gotten when the blackout hit only his house, the sense of something engineered to look accidental. Friday came anyway, because time doesn't pause for fear. The gym was packed, loud with holiday fundraiser cheer, and Benjamin walked in with Laura and their son like he was playing his part in a play he hadn't auditioned for. Paper snowflakes hung from the rafters. The pep band warmed up with off-key confidence. The air smelled like popcorn and cheap cologne and wet winter coats. Normal? Except Benjamin couldn't stop scanning for the abnormal inside it. He watched the coach, Coach Harland, the same man who'd been smiling for years in community photos, the same man who shook hands at booster dinners and called kids son. Harland moved along the sideline with a steady calm, but his hands did strange small things when the crowd got loud. 2 taps to his clipboard, a pause, then a finger dragged along the edge as if wiping dust that wasn't there. On the court, a guard named Nate Keller, Eastbridge's quick, reliable scorer, played like he was half a second ahead of everyone else. Then, 6 minutes into the first quarter, Keller committed a foul so unnecessary it looked like stupidity. Benjamin felt his pulse spike, not because of the foul, but because Keller's eyes flicked, just once, to the far corner of the gym, to a section of bleachers Benjamin hadn't looked at yet. And when Benjamin finally followed that glance, he saw a man sitting alone near the exit doors, coat still on indoors, watching the court with a stillness that didn't belong in a place full of noise. The man wasn't cheering. He wasn't even blinking much. He was counting something. And Benjamin had the sickening realization that maybe the foul count wasn't the message at all. Maybe the foul count was just the clock, and the real message was who showed up to read it. Benjamin tried to tell himself the man by the exit was just a parent waiting for a ride, just someone who didn't like crowds, just someone who'd rather watch a game from the edge of it. But then Coach Harland looked over, not a head turn, not a stare, just a fraction of a glance that landed exactly where that man sat. And Benjamin watched the man's hand move inside his coat pocket like he was answering a cue. On the court, Nate Keller drove hard to the lane, and when he should have pulled back, he extended his forearm a little too far, an offensive foul so clean it was almost polite. The whistle cut through the gym. The crowd groaned. Harland didn't protest. He didn't even look irritated. He marked something on his clipboard with the slow care of someone recording a temperature. Not a mistake. And the man by the exit rose. He didn't hurry. He didn't look around. He simply stood, waited for the referee to hand the ball over, and stepped out through the doors as if the foul had been an alarm only he could hear. Benjamin's throat went dry. He told Laura he needed the restroom. A harmless lie. A domestic lie. The kind you tell without thinking, except his voice came out thinner than he meant it to. Laura nodded, distracted by the band and the noise and their son's wide-eyed attention. Benjamin moved down the bleacher steps with his hands in his pockets so nobody could see them shaking. The corridor outside the gym was warmer, quieter, lit by buzzing fluorescent tubes that made everything look sickly and flat. He walked toward the restrooms and kept going past them, drawn to the exit doors like a compass needle. Through the narrow window glass, he saw the man in the coat crossing the parking lot, not toward a car, but toward the alley line behind the gym where delivery trucks sometimes parked for games. Snow had been pushed into dirty piles there, and the light from the street lamp barely reached it. A second figure stepped out of the shadow by the dumpsters. They met without greeting. No handshake, no hug, not even a look that said they knew each other. Just two bodies angling close enough that a hand could pass something small and nobody from the gym would notice. Benjamin held his breath. The man in the coat brought his hand out of his pocket and, for the briefest second, something pale flashed between his fingers, like a folded receipt or a slip of paper torn clean from a pad. The other figure took it with a motion so smooth it looked like adjusting a sleeve. Then the second figure turned his head, not toward the gym, toward Benjamin. It wasn't a direct line of sight. There was glass and distance and glare, but the turn was too exact to be coincidence. Benjamin felt his pulse slam. He stepped back from the window instantly, as if the glass had burned him, and the corridor suddenly felt too exposed, too echoing, too empty. He walked fast now, not running, because running would make it real. He passed the restrooms, turned a corner, and nearly collided with a man coming the other way, carrying a cardboard drink tray like he'd just left the concession stand. The man steadied the tray with one hand and steadied Benjamin with the other. Firm, quick, practiced. "You're lost," the man said softly. Without smiling, Benjamin blinked. "What?" The man leaned in just enough that his words didn't carry. "Go back to your seat. Don't look at the doors again. And don't take your family out to the parking lot after the game." Benjamin's stomach dropped. "Who are you?" The man's eyes flicked once down the corridor, listening the way people listen when they're used to being followed. "Someone who's been waiting for them to make a mistake," he murmured, "and you just watched it happen." Benjamin didn't remember the walk back to the bleachers, only the feeling of his own body moving on instructions he didn't fully understand, like a man crossing thin ice because someone else told him where the weight would hold. He slid into his seat beside Laura with the careful calm of someone trying not to disturb a sleeping animal. Their son was still chewing popcorn, still tracking the ball with innocent focus, still believing a gym on a Friday night was the safest place in the world. Benjamin kept his hands clasped between his knees so she wouldn't see them tremble. On the court, Coach Harland called a timeout he didn't need. The team wasn't rattled. The score wasn't bleeding. The timeout landed like punctuation. Harland gathered his players close, shielding their faces from the crowd. His mouth moved in short bursts. Simple coaching. Harmless strategy, except Benjamin watched his hand. Harland's thumb tapped his clipboard twice, paused, then tapped once more. A pattern, not dramatic, not even obvious, just consistent with everything Benjamin had seen for weeks. Nate Keller nodded once. Too crisp, too obedient. The referee handed the ball in. Play resumed. Nate moved to the top of the key, and instead of looking for the pass, he looked toward the far bleachers, toward the exit, just long enough to confirm someone was there. He drove again, hard into the lane, and this time he didn't even pretend to avoid contact. His elbow clipped a defender's chest. Whistle. Offensive foul. The crowd erupted in frustrated noise. A dad 2 rows down swore under his breath. Laura rolled her eyes like it was the same stupid mistake, the kind you live with when you love a team that can't get out of its own way. Benjamin didn't move, because from the corner of his vision he saw the doors at the side of the gym open a fraction, and a man he hadn't noticed earlier slipped out as if the foul had unlocked him. And then, quietly, absurdly, Benjamin realized the code wasn't only in the foul, it was in when it happened. The count, the type, the timing relative to the clock, a message built out of something nobody would ever question because everyone expected the game to be messy. Coach Harlan's face stayed composed, but his eyes kept flicking, microchecks, toward the band, toward the ceiling rafters, toward the line where a camera could be hidden without looking like a camera at all. A normal coach wouldn't look up there. A man trained to fear being watched would. Benjamin's stomach tightened, as if his body had decided it was done pretending this was only a sports story. The fourth quarter started with the kind of energy that felt almost scripted, like the gym itself was being wound tighter. And then Nate committed the same foul again. Same lane, same contact, same whistle, so consistent it became impossible to explain as accident. Harlan didn't argue. He smiled, just a little, not at his player, at the scoreboard. Benjamin understood then that the code might not even be meant for whoever was outside. It could be for someone inside the gym, someone watching the numbers on that glowing board, someone who could read fouls like letters. He leaned toward Laura, voice low. When this ends, we're leaving with the crowd. Not early, not late. With everyone. Laura frowned. Ben! What? Please, he whispered, and the word came out sharper than he intended, edged with something she'd never heard from him in a gym. Trust me. She stared at him for a beat, reading his face, and whatever she saw made her nod without another question. She pulled their son closer, a small protective gesture that felt suddenly enormous. The final minutes played out like a ritual. Harlan watched the exit. Nate watched Harlan. The fouls landed with metronome precision, and Benjamin forced himself to look like a man who cared only about basketball, while his mind kept replaying the alley behind the gym. The pale slip of paper. The head turned toward the glass. When the buzzer finally sounded, the crowd surged to its feet in a single loud wave. Benjamin waited, heart hammering, then stood only when everyone else stood, letting the noise and bodies swallow his family into something that couldn't be separated cleanly. As they moved with the crowd down the bleachers, the man with the drink tray appeared again. No tray now, just a plain jacket, plain face, plain presence. He didn't stop them. He didn't guide them. He simply walked parallel for a moment, close enough that his words could ride the roar of the gym. Keep going, he said. Don't look back. Benjamin didn't. Outside, the parking lot was a field of headlights and breath clouds. Hundreds of people moving at once. Too many witnesses for anything surgical. Benjamin kept Laura's hand in one grip and his son's mittened wrist in the other, moving like a man pushing through a storm. He never saw the blue sedan clearly. He never saw who sat inside it. But he did hear an engine start in the wrong place, too close, too controlled, and then stop again, as if someone decided the moment wasn't safe. They reached their car. Benjamin loaded his family in with shaking hands and started the engine without realizing he'd been holding his breath. As he pulled out into the slow stream of traffic, he glanced in the rearview mirror once, only once, and saw the gym doors still vomiting people into the cold, and beyond them, near the shadow line of the alley, two dark figures separating in opposite directions, like they'd never been connected at all. At home, after the house was locked and their son was asleep, and Laura finally asked again what was happening. Benjamin couldn't give her a clean answer, because the truth was not a story you could explain over a kitchen table. 2 days later, a man in a gray sedan that looked like every other sedan on the road parked across from Benjamin's workplace at lunch. Benjamin felt his chest tighten, felt the old instinct to spiral. But the man didn't approach. He simply sat. Then, at exactly 12:14, he left, and that night, the local paper ran a small, buried notice. Coach Harlan had resigned for personal reasons. Nate Keller had transferred to a different program. No scandal, no details, just absence. Benjamin watched the words on the page like they were smoke from something that had burned close to his house without ever touching it. A week later, the phone rang at Benjamin's home. It rang once, then went silent. Benjamin stared at it, throat tight, waiting for a knock, waiting for the rehearsed taps, waiting for someone to come collect what they'd failed to collect at the gym. But nothing came. Only, on his porch the next morning, a plain envelope sat under the doormat as if it had been there all night. Inside was a single piece of paper, typed. No signature. You did what civilians are supposed to do. You made it public. And below that, a second line that felt less like reassurance and more like a warning meant to keep his family alive. Do not go looking for the rest. Benjamin folded the paper carefully and slid it into the back of a drawer where Laura would never find it and where he would never be tempted to read it again, because he finally understood the most brutal part of it. In that gym, under bright lights and holiday banners and the smell of popcorn, a war had briefly passed through. Quiet, invisible, indifferent to who got hurt. And the only reason his family had walked out untouched was because, for one night, the people who operated in shadows couldn't afford to make a scene.